Hey everyone, this is Dr. Eric Fields, a psychologist specializing in addiction, who is now turning his focus towards helping parents and partners of those struggling with these kinds of issues. I get asked a lot, how do I specifically help parents and partners really influence their loved ones to get the help that they need? There are a lot of different things I teach parents and partners that range from communication skills to modeling certain kinds of behaviors to strategically influencing their loved ones and teaching them those kinds of skills. But one aspect I'm going to focus on today is helping your loved one feel that they can deal with adversities without their addiction. There are a lot of personal reasons why people struggle with different kinds of addictions. The list goes on and on. And unlike the anonymous groups, I believe that addiction is a very personal struggle, not the kind of struggle that can be generalized to say that everybody struggles the same exact way with an addiction and they all have the same reasons because it's some sort of disease. And I don't believe that. I believe that addiction is very, very personal. But there are some generalizations that we can make about people that have this issue. And one of the generalizations is that they have a hard time coping with life's challenges, or, which can be just as paralyzing, they don't believe that they can deal with life's challenges. And so they turn to a substance or they turn to a behavior, a compulsive behavior, like let's say gambling or out of control sexual behavior. Because this behavior or substance helps them cope. Now, how specifically does it help them cope? Well, that's where the real personal reasons come into play. But we're not going to get into that right now. We're just going to keep it on this general, broad level to really help you understand why it's so difficult for your loved one or child or partner to give up this addiction. If they don't believe, regardless of whether or not it's true, right? Perception is their reality. If they don't believe that they can deal with life without their addiction, they are not going to give it up. So, where do you come in as parents and partners to help them change this perception and maybe even begin to help them cope with life without this addiction? The first most important thing that you can do is conveying to your loved one that life can be dealt with without substances and compulsive behaviors. And yes, even they can do it. And the way that we want you to convey it to them is because we don't want to lie or mislead. So what I mean by that is you wouldn't want to tell them that they can absolutely do it and it's no problem. It's easy. You do it all the time. Many people do it without an addiction. come on, enough of this crap. Let's just get off the sauce, stop this, ridiculous behavior and just deal with life. That is not going to work. Number one, it's truly invalidating because while chances are high that their perception is distorted, that they're not giving themselves enough credit, it's not totally off base in the sense that when you get into a habit of relying on something external to yourself to deal with life's challenges, coping skills are like a muscle. If you don't use them, you lose them. They atrophy over time, right? If you're not using them, that is. So, will life be more difficult initially to deal with without this addiction? The answer is yes, it will be more difficult. So you first want to validate for them that their struggle is real. It is going to be more difficult. However, it's not going to be impossible. It's not going to be something that's going to take them their entire life. It's not something where they have to feel absolutely miserable every single day and white knuckle it. This does not have to be the situation for them. So you acknowledge that it will be challenging, but not as challenging as they think it will be. That is the first most important step for you to take is giving them the sense of hope that it can be done. Now, if they're going to lose this crutch, then what's going to replace it? Well, eventually treatment, hopefully, right, will replace it and will help them deal with life and all of its challenges. But before they make that step, a lot of times there has to be this kind of intermediary step, something in between you saying, this is very possible to live life without this addiction, and treatment. And this is where you come in again as the parents and partners of someone struggling with an addiction. You are going to model for them how to cope with challenges. And you're not going to do it in a patronizing way because that's not going to be helpful. You're going to do it in a very humanistic, compassionate way by saying things such as, hey, you know what? I understand that life can be really overwhelming for you. You know what? It can be overwhelming for me too. Let me give you an example of something that I dealt with recently that was really challenging. And this is what happened, and this is how I was feeling. And I eventually overcame that challenge. And now this is where I'm at, and I'm feeling so much more empowered that I was able to deal with this on my own. So, insert name here. I totally get that feeling of wanting to avoid and escape. Sometimes I want to avoid and escape as well as your parent, as your partner, what have you. I get it. I understand that life can really be overwhelming at times. But I'm telling you, when you deal with life like this, it makes it so much better. And you feel so much more resilient and stronger. And the more of these examples that you give them, the better. But again, and I have to emphasize this, it can't be in a patronizing way. It can't be in a parenting way so much. It has to be more in a way of a teammate. Like, hey, buddy, I totally get it why you're struggling the way you are. I struggle too. The only difference is I do it on my own without using a substance or relying on a behavior, but I get why you feel the need. Life is freaking tough at times. But highlighting for them what the process looks like. Sometimes actually, a lot of times, people with addiction have unrealistic expectations of what it's like to cope. Like a lot of them like erroneously believe that for most of us it's really simple, right? Like we have a challenge and we kind of like, all right, let me figure out what I'm going to do here. Okay, that's my plan. I'm going to do it. I did it. Great, wonderful. And meanwhile, that's not the process for us at all, right? Like those of us that aren't struggling with an addiction, like that's not how we deal with big challenges, right? How do we typically deal with big challenges? Sometimes we're scared shitless. Sometimes there's a lot of dread and anxiety, a lot of stress, feelings of helplessness, feelings of defeat, feelings like we're not going to be able to overcome this challenge. Sometimes there's a lot of uncertainty, unpredictability, not feeling like we can deal with it. We have a lot of the same feelings with experiencing challenges that people with addiction do. But the difference is a lot of times we don't aggrandize it to such a level like they do. So like if we're feeling like a bit defeated or overwhelmed, in their mind, they're going to feel completely defeated, completely overwhelmed, powerless, not able to do anything, right? So there is a difference in degree, but we still have similar feelings when we get thrown a major curveball in life, and especially a major adversity or challenge. So the degree is one difference. The other difference is a level of confidence that initially we might be feeling like this is impossible, but it doesn't take us long to say, hey, you know what? I've dealt with some pretty hard crap in life, and this is really no different. I'm sure I can handle this because I've handled so many other really tough situations in life. If I just take a couple breaths and give it some time and reorient myself, I know eventually I'm going to be able to figure out the best way to deal with this. And so there's that level of confidence, and the reason why we have that level of confidence and they don't is simple. It's because we have been dealing with life's adversities without a crutch for a long, long time, right? Most of us our entire lives. And that's how you get that confidence. Every time you overcome an adversity without relying on a crutch or something external, and you do it on your own, it empowers you more and more and more. So it's like all these little wins or big wins and victories add up over time to make us feel like we can handle life. Okay. The third thing, now, this one is probably where the biggest disparity really is between people with addiction and people that deal with life without an addiction. And that is for those of us that don't have an addiction, we know very well that life is only going to be worse if we keep relying on something that is just going to provide temporary relief at best. And it's going to make us feel really, really guilty, right? People with an addiction have been relying on this thing for so long. And so they're used to it. And so while they still experience guilt because of it, because they've kind of created these mental grooves in their mind and they're just kind of so used to doing the behavior, a lot of times the guilt is not nearly as bad as like what we would experience, just because they're used to doing it over and over and over again. It's not such a big deal when you've done it so many times before. And again, they still feel crappy about doing it, but for us, we look at that and be like, how could you not feel horrible about doing this thing? Right? Or how could you not feel incredible guilt for not trying to deal with life on your own and constantly using this thing to deal with life? And that's where the biggest disparity is, that they're really used to it. Now, your job as a parent or partner is not to make them feel completely shitty and horrible about this. And I think that's where a lot of you go wrong. You think that if I make them feel so horrible about their behavior, then they'll eventually stop. And that actually backfires because the more horrible you make them feel about their behavior, because they're not feeling confident and they're not feeling like they're able to deal with life without it, the more that they want to now escape those feelings. And so it makes the addiction a lot of times even worse. So that's not the way to go about it. So how do we kind of, minimize this disparity, right? In terms of us just intuitively knowing that this will just make our lives worse, and someone with an addiction who just isn't kind of feeling that as much because they're so used to doing it over and over again. Well, the first thing you have to do is not focus on the negatives. Like, rather than focusing so much on the negative consequences of doing this behavior, you want to focus on the positives of not doing this behavior. Okay. So, in other words, there is a technique in solution focused therapy where we get somebody to really visualize what their life is going to look like without this addiction. And that's kind of what I want you to do here. It's basically like giving them a glimpse of what life could be without it and really kind of encouraging their behavior to move towards that rather than to move away from the addiction, to move towards a life that they feel more empowered, they feel better about themselves, they feel more in control, they feel like they can handle life's adversities, and they're just feeling more at peace with themselves and really trying to help them visualize that. And you can do it as we do it as therapists, which is basically asking them, like, tell me about what your life would look like without this addiction. If you weren't compulsively gambling all the time, if you weren't drinking all the time, what would your life look like if you felt like you could handle life and all of its challenges? And every time you did, you felt even better about yourself, and you never felt like you needed something external to yourself to deal with life, and really trying to get them to look at that. A lot of people with addiction have had periods of abstinence where they didn't drink or gamble for many, many months. And so a lot of times they've already experienced that. And so you can strategically ask them what life was like when they didn't have to deal with their addiction of substance. Okay, this is extremely important. Getting them to feel hopeful that they can deal with life without their addiction, modeling for them how to deal with life without an addiction and how to do it on your own, and making that human connection that it isn't easy, but it can be done, and I'm living proof. I feel the same ways that you do, maybe not the same degree, but I feel it a lot of times that these adversities are very tough, but I'm able to press on, and you can get to that point too. They have to know that the longer they stay away from this addictive behavior and the more they deal with life on their own and kind of accrue all these successes, the more confident they get and the more that they will feel like you do when you deal with life's adversities. And then, thirdly, really kind of selling them on this idea that, okay, I know you don't feel so great about your addiction, but let's not focus on, just trying to get rid of this behavior that you don't like. Let's try to focus on what life would be like if you were just handling it on your own, and really getting them to kind of visualize that by using their past when they have been able to do it without substances, and by just kind of like using, if in theory, right? How much better life would be if you're handling life's challenges on your own. This is extremely important. Next time, I'm going to be talking about a therapeutic technique that we use that's super, super important to influence people to start making positive changes, especially people struggling with addiction. And the techniques are based on motivational interviewing theory and strategy. And that's another way that you're going to be able to positively influence your loved one to start making the changes they need to make or to get the help that they need to get. I hope that this was helpful for you. You can influence your adult child, your loved one, to change and get the help they need and ultimately overcome their addiction.